This is the second week of Explore God, and even after last week, I saw a tremendous amount of videos that appeared with very much the same title as our first study, and it's amazing how many groups I've heard of that are meeting throughout the city in different places. And so as we came to this second title, Is There a God? You know, I really struggled all week. And I had many, many conversations with, how are you going to handle that on Sunday? Because we come to this place with, we already have an understanding of an answer to that question, right? I mean, we walk into this place in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the very first verse in the Bible, we read that in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then if you look at the very first chapter of John, verses 1 through 5, we read the very first three words of John are the very first three words of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, capital W, and the Word was with God, capital G, and the Word was God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. So we come to this place every week with that belief. We believe that. So the answer is really quite simple for the basic question, is God real? That's not even a question for a Christian. And I think about this opportunity, and as we're exploring God as a city, and so many millions of dollars are being put into this media campaign, and I begin to think. I thought about as a child and as a teenager. I'll say some words that some of you probably don't even remember, like training union and things like that. But we used to come together on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights and be prepared, trained to go back out into the world each week and answer questions of people who did not believe in God. Who if you ask the question, is God real, they might say, I don't know. And I think that was probably a rarer thing than it is today. I know it is, because we talk about that. And as I began to prepare for this Sunday, there were so many places I wanted to go. Because you know what I want? I think about you parents who have young children or older children. And I think about where these kids go each day. And I think about where the people that are molding their minds and their hearts come from. And I thought, is the pulpit a place to talk about some of these things? And then I thought, you know what? These parents and young people need to be encouraged. They need to be encouraged to have these discussions with people who believe either that there is no God or don't have an understanding of God. Most of my life, I've met people, intelligent people, they're usually younger people for whatever reason, but science-minded people. And what I see in them when you begin to have a conversation is a struggle that's going on within them, that just maybe God exists. I mean, they're highly educated. They're studying science. They're studying higher learning, if you will, and you can see the struggle going on within them. They feel like maybe God does exist. But they seem to get comfortable in the fact that, well, Christians can't actually prove it. I can't prove that there's not a God. They can't prove that there is one, so maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm okay. Because most of these people that you run up against, they say, I cannot believe unless there's this airtight proof that there's a God. And they are coming from something that has a name. And it's called rationalism. It's that they have to have logic. Everything has to be proven to them. Okay? And so, though they may never disprove that God exists, there's still this kind of unsettledness within them that, what if God does exist? What if there is a God? You know, what I think this helps to illustrate is that for people in general, whether you're Christian or not, we tend to accept many of our deepest beliefs, things that we believe in, and we really have no real proof to justify them. Okay? No absolute scientific proof. Whoever you are, you tend to believe a lot of things that you believe. And so this has led some to ask, do we need airtight proof that there's a God? And I can tell you that especially since World War II, digging over in the desert in the Middle East, constantly trying to come up with some sort of proof that the Bible's true. And you know what? Time and time and again, they find things over and over again. You see it in the news. And it always supports the Bible. I mean, you probably read about a lot of these finds. It always supports the Bible, right? It never disproves the Bible. And so you have these critics of belief in God and critics of belief in existence of God. And they think that even if there are all these Christians that believe so strongly in God, they can't absolutely prove it. And so you look at those people and you say, well, do you apply this to your life, to your belief also? If they did, they would have to admit that they believe a lot of things that they can't absolutely prove. I mean, and again, I can't go into these things deeply with the amount of time that I have, but things like, how old is the world? How old is the earth? Well, scientists try to constantly tell you how old it is. They can't prove it. They absolutely can't prove it. But it's taught to our children. It's taught to our college students just as though someone has absolutely proved it, right? Evolution is taught to our children as though they have absolute proof of its existence. The Supreme Court ruled in 1993 that evolution would be taught in public schools, yet there is no proof of evolution. Okay? But if you well, I can't even go there. That's a whole place to go, but I can't even go there. So that said, you know, multiple arguments have been advanced as evidence that God exists. There's no shortage of them. There's no shortage of arguments that are out there that God exists. If you want to get into that and research it, you'll find all kinds of arguments that God exists. But I guarantee you that for the most part, none of them are going to convince one of these skeptics, one of these scientific-minded people, that God exists. Okay? However, and this is what I would suggest, and this is how to approach it. When you take these arguments together, when you take these evidences together that God exists, they truly warrant reflection. They warrant consideration. They demand that they be considered. So let me suggest, when you get around people, when you come across people, so what I'm saying is here, I urge you to involve yourself with these kind of people. I urge you to get into conversations with these kind of people. So when you come to them, take these evidences of God, and instead of talking about them in their terms of proofs of God, maybe start talking about them along the lines of clues. Maybe instead of the word proof, maybe use the word clues. When we go about it with that perspective, we begin to see that together, all of these clues, all of these things that point to God have a lot of power to them. There's a lot of evidence of God in this world. It's everywhere around us. There's a lot of evidence to God. So when you approach these people who think this way, whether they're atheists or scientists or whatever they are, approach them with evidence that you have of God. You know, and I'm not going to set on this long this morning, but let me just name a few of these. And a lot of them you might say, oh, I just don't even care about that kind of stuff. You just might. But I'm going to tell you, until we start as parents and grandparents, unless we start talking about some of these things, I guarantee you when they go to school tomorrow, when they go to college one day, there are plenty of people who don't believe in God that are completely willing to talk to them in very intelligent ways about the reason that they believe. But let me just give you some evidences, some clues that there is a God. And we could talk for days on each one of these. But just some evidences that there is a God. Well, just the fact that we exist. I mean, just the fact, look around. The person sitting next to you, in front of you, and behind you is an absolute miracle. I mean, if you were to study humans, it is an absolute incredible thing. The existence of something rather than nothing is a clue that there was a creator. Okay? That the universe has order to it to a remarkable degree. And we could go on from that. I mean, just think of things like the way everything reproduces. All of these things, it's incredible. It points to the fact that there was a creator rather than there wasn't. Our values, our morals. You see some of the violence going on in other parts of the world right now? You think morals and values came about by accident? I don't think so. There's another clue to God that there was a creator, that he put an order, that he put morals and values within his creation. Our consciousness and our intelligence. I mean, it points to the fact that someone with a conscience and with great intelligence created us. And then just the fact that humans have incredible features that are more easily explained that a God created them rather than we somehow millions of years ago accidentally came about. Just those 5 things point to the fact that there was a creator instead of some natural process that came about. You know, even the existence of suffering and evil, which we're going to spend the whole time on next week, which is a huge question of those that come to you that question God. Even the existence of suffering and evil, when you think about it, are better explained by the fact that there was a God than that they happened under some natural process. But the bottom line in these questions, as people come to us, is that there has to be a weighing of the options, a weighing of what we believe. And the existence of the universe as we perceive it is simply better accounted for when we allow for the possibility of the existence of God. Let me say that again. The universe as we know it, it's simply, as we perceive it, is simply better accounted for when we allow for the existence of God. One of my favorite, I'm not a big fan of philosophy. I'm just not a fan of it. But one of my favorite philosophers was C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis was an atheist. He did not believe in God. But God found him. And he became a Christian. And he said this, many have come to believe in God for the same reason they believe the sun has risen. It's not just because they can see it rise, but because of all the other things they can see when it does. And there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that. The second question that came into my mind this week, as I think about this topic, is that comes up among the many that I could have talked about, is the question that then comes, because you have to realize there's people in this world that believe in God, but they don't believe in Jesus. Okay? Millions of people, billions actually, billions of people believe in God, but they don't believe in Jesus. So that's something else that we have to be talking about. Did Jesus exist? Could it be that Jesus never existed? Has everyone been deceived? Because that's what a lot of people would have us to believe, that somehow we have been deceived. You know, when I was a kid, and I still to this day love the stories from the Dark Ages like King Arthur. And I love any movie made where they depict King Arthur, you know, Lancelot, Maid Marian, and Camelot. I don't know, I'm just in love with that idea of that place and that time. And I'm going to admit to you, I thought it was real. I used to, till adulthood even, I thought it was real. I thought there really was a King Arthur who led, you know, the fight against, you know, bad and evil. And then I found out one day, all they really know is you can put in about 2 sentences about King Arthur. I hope I haven't disturbed any of your views of it. But I was really let down because I thought King Arthur was a real man and a real leader and a real king, and that was true stuff. But you know, there's nothing more disappointing than having something like that and then finding out that it's not true. You know, it's disappointing. And I bet there's things that you've believed in your life. And I'm not talking about the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. I mean, give you those. I'm talking about real things that you believed in. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was someone in your life. And it wasn't really what you thought it was. And it really let you down. Really let you down. And I think when these things happen in our lives, we begin to think, are there other things that aren't true? Are there other things in this world? Other things? Maybe have I been deceived? Are there other things that aren't? Who else never existed? Right? And so, you know, of course, discovering King Arthur was not real has little to do with my everyday life. It really does. But what about one of the most famous people in history? Jesus of Nazareth. What about one of the most famous people? Is it possible that he never existed? That everyone who believes in him has been deceived? Because I'm telling you, billions of people in this world want us to believe that. They want us to believe that somehow we've been deceived. And somebody might say, is that possible? That's the wrong question. That's the wrong question to ask. It's not what we can prove. It's what's the important question to ask, is it probable? It's not whether it's possible, is it probable? You know, and I don't have time to tell you all them today, but I'd be glad to share them with you. But there are many historical references to Jesus. There are many men who wrote in the century that Jesus lived, in the century after him, about Jesus. Dozens of them. Josephus, one of the most famous, the famous writer of the War of the Jews and the history of the Jews. Tacitus, one of the greatest writers of Roman history up till the end of the first century, wrote of Jesus. And they basically, if you just take those views, you find someone who lived from about 4 BC to 28 AD, and he's real, he's in history. And you know what doesn't exist? You know what absolutely doesn't exist? Is any work that says they're lying, that Jesus didn't exist. Okay, keep that thought in your mind, because as would be expected, as many writers that were Jewish or were Greek or were Roman who wrote about Jesus, there was just as many who were Christian. We have Clement of Rome, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Justin Martyr, Tertullian. They wrote about Jesus. But the largest body of evidence, the largest writing about Jesus, is what we call the New Testament. Okay? So you had 4 different books. We call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were all written in the first century after Jesus' death. And they stand as we call them Gospels, but they stand as a history, a chronicle of the life of Jesus Christ. They tell the story of Jesus Christ. Who were they written by? Well, yes, they were written by followers of Jesus Christ. And as John put it in his gospel, this was written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. You know what? Think about this. What did I just tell you about all the other works? Same is true for these. We can find not one single solitary document from the first 2 centuries that say what these men are writing is not true, that it's a lie. What happens today, say it's Donald Trump. Everybody knows who Donald Trump is, right? Everything he says is instantly analyzed, right? And there's a news person immediately telling you whether it was true or not, right? Fact checks, whatever you want to call it. Oh, this isn't true just for Donald. It's true for anyone. You get on the internet and make a comment on something. I don't care what news story it is. Somebody's going to fact. You do it on Facebook. Put some bit of information out there that you know is not true. You'll have 50 people correct you within a few minutes, right? Well, it wasn't as quick in the days of Jesus, but all of these writers were historians, philosophers, and then the gospel writers. If someone would have heard what they said and wrote something against it, it would be here. It would be there for us to examine. It never happened. It never happened. To be sure though, well, let me use another example. Let me use another example, because I think this may be so far away that it's hard to put it in perspective. During World War II, the Nazis, Adolf Hitler and the German army, put to death millions of Jewish people. Millions of Jewish people and others. Millions of other people along with it that they considered undesirable. After it was discovered, historians undertook projects to document what had happened. So that it would never happen again, right? No one wants to see what happened in Nazi Germany ever happen again. Who wrote most of the documentation? It was Jewish people. Jewish historians recorded it and wrote it. Now, I wasn't alive then, but I haven't been able to find. And also other historians recorded it. Who was best to tell the story? Who was best to record what happened in those concentration camps? The Jews. Did they have a reason? Yeah, to write it. They didn't want it to happen again. They wanted everyone to know about it. Well, did you know today, after most of those people that were eyewitnesses have died, after all of the physical evidence is gone, there are people who are standing up and saying, it never happened. It never happened. There are historians in universities, considered authorities, that are saying, it never happened. It was all a lie. Does that offend you? It should. But now put that in perspective. 2,000 years ago, but let me add, there was nobody at the time of the Holocaust or any time after that, when there were still witnesses, when there was still physical evidence, there was nobody standing up and saying, they're lying. It never happened. No one. So let me take you back 2,000 years ago. Jesus lived. Miracles, healings, transformed lives. Jewish scholars, Greek scholars, Roman scholars documented this. And the men who followed him documented the actual events. We study them. We do come into this place and we study the events that happened. No one denied it. While there was still physical evidence and still witnesses, it was after the followers of Jesus died and the physical evidence was gone before anybody said, wait a minute, this isn't true. I've spent some time on this morning, and believe me, it's been a strange thing to talk about from the pulpit, but I do that because I want you to do it. I encourage you to do it. But I did get to a place this week where the question came. I obviously believe there's a God. I believe Jesus lived. Absolutely. And I think where these same people asking all these questions, my prayer get to in your conversation is, how can I find God? That's the question we want people to get to. How can I find God? And I think most people search for God in what might be called religion. What is religion? Religion is the belief in God or gods. So if you've got someone who doesn't know anything about God, they might think, I want to learn about God. I need to go find out about religion. And so, maybe you know someone who's interested in God or interested in knowing more about God, toying with the idea of searching for God. That maybe they have no idea where to start. And that's understandable because this is difficult. Nobody has all of the answers. And this is the kind of journey that is intensely personal, searching for God. I mean, do you know how many billions of people are searching for God every day? Billions of people are out there searching for God every day. And I think from the time we're children, we like great things. We like things that are bigger. That's why we stand before things like the Grand Canyon and go, wow. But when we get older, when we get to be adults and we start asking life questions, the world just doesn't seem to be enough. And no matter how much, like we talked about last week, no matter how much of the world we put into ourselves, it's just not enough. It just doesn't answer the questions. And unfortunately with religion, God's not always the first thing we encounter. I mean, you have to realize, and I'm using religion in a very broad sense. There's a lot of religions out there. There's religions in the world today, in the Middle East, that are chopping your right hand and your left foot off if you don't believe what they believe. They say they believe in God. Okay, so you see my point. Just finding religion doesn't necessarily lead you to our God. And I think for the most part today, even within Christianity, the God that we present to people is one that maybe we can keep in a little box. It's kind of a God that we can keep in a box, like a genie in a bottle. And when we need him, we rub on on the bottle that he comes out and he heals us or he gives us what. But when we go about life, we want him to get back in the box or get back in the bottle. And that's a God that's been created by humans. That's not the God of the Bible. See, Christians believe that people were created in God's image, and therefore we are a reflection of God's love. So this makes it even more important that we act in a way that reflects God's principles, and a lot more damaging when we don't. You know, maybe you have someone in your life right now that's searching. Maybe they're suffering. Maybe it's a disease. Maybe it's from relationships. Whatever it is. There's a lot of things that can lead us, that can happen in our life, that can turn us to the question of, is God real? Is there a God? And I'm praying for these things in the lives of your children and your family and your friends and coworkers. But ultimately, even after all of these proofs and questions, I found it's come to being found. It's come to being found. You know, have you ever looked back in your life and you looked and you thought and you realized that if X and Y wouldn't have happened, you wouldn't have got to Z? You know, if this and this wouldn't have happened, it may be that you think about your husband or your wife or your child or your job, all these different circumstances. And you know, in a lot of ways we think these events are purely coincidental. And we study them though and we think, but I don't think so. But I don't think so. It was just impossible for this and this and this to happen together. That's God finding you. That's one of the ways God finds us. You know, we get involved in these situations perhaps while we're looking for God, maybe even beforehand, and we figure out God's looking for us. God is searching for us. It's almost illogical, but the process of finding God becomes less of one of finding Him, but one of realizing He's been looking for me. All along, God has been looking for me. And then it's this realizing that we've been found. Okay? Most people can attest to experiences. I would bet most of you as Christians can attest to an experience of a very personal interaction with God. I've heard some of you give your testimony that you've had a very personal interaction with God where there was deep love and forgiveness, and they're conveyed in ways to me sometimes that are difficult for you to describe in words. Okay? And so it could have happened in a church, maybe something you heard preached, could have happened anywhere. It may be that it happened at a time when you were desperately ill or sick or injured and were pleading with someone to help you. Or it may be that it came to you in this time of intense joy. You maybe didn't even realize why you had so much joy in your life. You had this sense of the miraculous. Maybe when you had your child or had a child. So many different ways that this happens. These are all ways that once we look back at them, you can see that God was intensely trying to seek us. And so, you know, these are kind of some of the exceptions, but there's many ways God goes about it. But Jesus said what? I came. God came to seek and to save the lost. God came in Jesus to seek and save the lost. To seek and save. That's why we see the shepherd image, right? The shepherd seeking his sheep. How many lost sheep find their shepherd? They don't. When you're lost, it means you can't find your way. Okay? So when we were lost, as the Bible says, it means that Jesus found us, that God found us. You know, I think the last thing I'll talk about, it's also about a calling out. Not only is it he is being found, but it's a calling out. The Bible says, come near to God, and he will come near to you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you. So think about that in the sense of being lost. You're lost. You don't know where God is. You don't know where you are. You're in the middle of darkness. What do? What do you do when you're completely lost and you want to be found? You cry out. You cry out. Help me. That's what it means when it says, come near to God and he will come near to you. You cry out to God and he will come near to you. You know, it may be that the key to finding God rests simply in taking the first step. And I think it does. The decision to seek him with all of our heart, with all of our minds, and maybe even words. Moses said in Deuteronomy, if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and all your soul. How about it? How about it? Ask yourself and ask those that God puts near you with all of these questions. Am I open? Am I open to being found? If you are, if they are, I encourage you, encourage them. Call out to God and be found. Call out to God and be found. Let me pray. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for helping me through the difficulty of these kind of conversations. Ultimately, Father, we live in a world that seems so prepared with so many arguments against your existence. And Father, ultimately, our biggest evidence is that which is in our heart and mind, the knowledge that you are who you say you are, and the love and kindness that you bestow upon us, and the miracles and the healings and the vision. Father, it's my prayer right now that we as a people step out into the oceans, into the deep, be willing to go to the places, have the conversations that you want us to have with people who absolutely do not believe, who have no concept of God whatsoever. Help us. And I especially pray this morning for our children, maybe grandchildren, but those being raised in a world where our own country's belief system is not in you. It is not just not of you, but against you. Father, make us wise. Help us to be wise. Give us wisdom. Give us the answers to the questions we need to have with our children. I pray also, especially for the young high school students, college students that we have in this room today. I thank you for their faith. Father, make them bold in their witness. Go with them into the schools they're in. Go with us into the workplaces that we go and make us bold witnesses. Help us to be willing to have these discussions. I pray that there are many more hundreds of thousands in our city today willing to explore God. I pray, lastly, that anyone who's lost, who's wanting to be found, will cry out to you. Say, here I am, God. And we can sing together, I once was lost, but you found me. Your precious Son's name.